What you're seeing now is footage from a few days ago. Residents in Yuhang district, including the Liangzhu area of Hangzhou, heading into the mountains to collect spring water. These days, with living standards getting better, it's rare to see people carrying buckets up into the hills for water like this. I mean, if you just want mineral water, you can always get it at the store. It's not like it's hard to find. Hangzhou's own Nongfu spring is actually really good. So why would people head into the mountains in the middle of this blazing summer just to get spring water? I saw a kid in the line too. He had on a shirt that said Guden Road Primary School, which is a local school in Liangzhu. Just picture that. A group of people, in this kind of heat, carrying buckets up the mountain for water. It's not easy at all. But the truth is, they didn't really have a choice. Just a few days ago, in Yuhang district, including Liangzhu, all the spring water and bottled water within a 10-kilometer radius was completely sold out. There just wasn't any left to buy. So some people had no choice but to carry buckets into the mountains to get spring water. But that raises the question, why was all the bottled water gone? And why did people have to go to the mountains for it?
在杭州洗菜做饭用的是什么水？用的是矿泉水。哪个城市能做到？
We've got to go back to July 16th. Around 9 a.m. that morning, some residents in Hangzhou's Yuhang district, including the Liangzhu area, turned on their taps like usual, getting ready to cook, wash vegetables, or take a shower. But they quickly noticed something wasn't right with the tap water. The smell was unusual. Not your typical odd smell, but something more complex, almost layered.
从昨天晚上开始，2组的这个水就臭了。然后最关键的是，你知道这个臭味，我给你们形容一下。我现在站在我房间的这个厕所的门口，我站在这儿我就能闻到那个臭味从那溢出来。不是说已经消掉了吗？不是说放久一点就会不臭吗？救命！
So what do we mean by layered? Well, at first, people said it smelled kind of like burnt plastic, that sharp, nasty smell when plastic melts. Pretty bad, right? But that wasn't the end of it. A little later, someone said it actually smelled more like pesticide. You know, that strong chemical stink you catch when farmers are spraying crops in the countryside. Super harsh and unpleasant. Then things got worse. Someone else said, wait, no, it smells like a dead rat. Like a rat that's been soaking in water for too long, rotting. Just imagine that smell spreading. It's disgusting. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, someone added, no, it's more like a sewage pit. You know, like the kind we had when we were kids. Those old outdoor toilets or septic tanks that just reeked. A lot of folks in their 50s or 60s still remember that stench. It was overwhelming.
在梁家河要解决这个缺煤少柴的问题，要搞沼气啊。最后这个一突开啊，就见了我满脸喷粪的，满脸是粪，但是呢，那个气就呼呼的往外冒，我们马上就是那个接起管子了以后啊。我们那个沼气灶上啊，就冒出1尺高的火焰来。
As soon as people said it smelled like a sewage pit, everyone realized something was seriously wrong. And you know what that means? It feels like there's poop in the water. Many people said the smell really did remind them of that. It was just awful. So yeah, the tap water had a strong, nasty smell, with layers to it. First burnt plastic, then pesticides, dead rat, and now sewage. Pretty disgusting. People got upset and started calling the water company non-stop, asking what was going on. But there was barely any response. No clear answer, no real action. Some residents filmed videos saying the water smelled terrible and posted them online. Once the videos spread, everyone realized the tap water wasn't safe to drink, and they rushed to buy bottled water. But some reacted too slowly and had already used it. One person said they cooked rice in the morning and didn't notice anything strange. But when they washed the dishes later, the smell from the bowls was awful. That was disgusting, especially since they'd already eaten. Others said they took a shower and noticed the smell on their body afterward. The more they washed, the worse it got. Instead of feeling clean, they just felt dirty.
杭州自来水污染的事情2天了还没有解决，现在是凌晨1点。我刚从朋友家洗完澡回来，大夏天上万户家庭用水被污染。
余杭水务公司的站长。这个事是人干的事情吗？这么大的城市，这个水会是臭的啊！我今天买水买了400块钱，你要给我报销掉去吧？搞得现在大家洗澡又跑到德清去洗澡啊！啊！这个水，哎
So that's why some people started calling Hangzhou residents stinky babies. The joke was, no matter how much you wash, you just end up smelling worse, hence the nickname. I saw one comment that was actually kind of funny. Someone said they usually don't splurge on food, but that day they bought over 100 yen worth of pork ribs to enjoy with their elderly mother. While cooking, everything seemed normal, but once it was done, no one touched it. Why? Because the whole pot smelled awful.
我妈说都1个月没买过这么好的菜了，一次买了80块钱的排骨，家里小孩子都回来了，妹妹也回来了，当时在温州舍不得吃，好嘞，烧好一碗，没人要吃。
People were furious. Social media quickly filled up with complaints, rants, and jokes. Everyone was talking about the strange-smelling tap water, demanding answers. But the Yuhang District Water Company stayed silent the whole day, until finally, at 9:44 that night, they put out a notice on their official account. Surprisingly, the announcement didn't say what actually went wrong, not a word about the cause. It simply stated that around 9 a.m., residents had reported an unusual smell in the tap water. After getting those reports, they said they activated an emergency plan, switched to a different water source, and by around 1:30 in the afternoon, the water had met all safety standards. They reassured residents that the water was now safe to drink. Just run your taps for a bit to flush out any leftover water, and if you wasted any during the process, don't worry. They'd compensate you later. That was the whole message. Naturally, people were not satisfied. For one, the company hadn't found the problem themselves. They only responded after residents complained. And two, even now, they refused to explain what had caused the awful smell. The notice felt vague, dismissive, and almost like they hoped people would forget about it. But people didn't forget. By the next day, rumors had taken over. The most popular theory, that sewage, actual human waste, somehow got into the tap water system. And the internet went wild. One nickname started trending fast, Stinky Baby. The idea was that no matter how many times you showered, the stink just wouldn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Someone shared a story that really captured the mood. He said that usually he didn't spend much on meals, but that day he bought over 100 yen worth of pork ribs to cook for himself and his elderly mother. While cooking, everything seemed normal. But once the dish was ready and the lid was lifted, the entire kitchen filled with a horrible smell. No one could eat it. The whole pot went to waste. Then came the wave of toilet humor. Online, people started calling women who bathed in the tap water poop shower ladies, a way of saying they had unknowingly bathed in sewage. Men got their own nickname too, turd drop guys, as if a lump of waste had landed directly on them from the shower head. Another phrase spread like wildfire. Taking a shower in Yuhang was now like getting poop on your head. It was a pun on an old saying about impending disaster. But this time, it wasn't metaphorical. People said, "It's not just bad luck anymore, it's literal sewage hitting us in the face." At 4 p.m. the following day, the water company put out a second statement. But once again, they didn't explain the cause. Just a short apology for the inconvenience, and a promise. Each household would receive 5 tons of water as compensation. They encouraged people to go ahead and flush their pipes. But instead of calming things down, it made people even angrier. One person joked, "So now in Hangzhou, even eating crap comes with a water meter." Another wrote, "This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a full-on sewage delivery." And the worst part? No one still had any real answers. The company hadn't said where the problem came from, and the speculation only got louder. Most people believed the most likely explanation, that sewage from a septic tank had somehow leaked into the main water supply. And honestly, that didn't sound like a stretch, because according to countless residents, the smell wasn't just unusual or unpleasant. It was unmistakable. It smelled exactly like human waste.
我现在站在我房间的这个厕所的门口，我站在这儿我就能闻到那个臭味从那溢出来。不是说已经消掉了吗？不是说放久一点就会不臭吗？救命啊！
Some people said the smell was so strong, you could smell it from several meters away. Just like standing near a toilet. It was exactly the same smell. So people started to wonder, did the water company make a mistake? Maybe somehow, sewage water got mixed into the tap water system. And there seemed to be proof. On the night of July 17th, many people turned on their taps and found the water not only smelled bad, but also looked dirty. The turbidity was really high. The water that came out wasn't just smelly, it was yellow. even orange yellow. It looked like muddy soup. That same day, the water company went around to different neighborhoods to flush the water tanks. When residents looked inside the tanks, they could clearly see a thick layer of yellow-orange stuff sticking to the bottom. What did it look like? Well, people didn't want to say it out loud, but let's be honest, it looked like poop. In fact, some even joked that it looked like textbook ideal poop, soft, formed, and yellow. In medical terms, that's considered the healthiest kind. So naturally, when people saw that same yellowish color in their water, that's exactly what came to mind. Some people tried to filter the water using gauze or cloth tied to the tap. But even after doing that, the water still came out yellow. Maybe it wasn't literal waste, but it sure looked the part. And through all of this, the water company still didn't come out to clarify or deny anything. Then, on July 18th, a strange police notice started circulating online. It claimed to be an official report from local authorities. The notice said a manager at the water company, someone with the surname Liu, had a grudge. Apparently, back in June 2024, a new chairman was appointed from outside the company. Liu was unhappy about it and decided to take revenge. According to the document, he ordered workers during construction to connect a sewage pipe, specifically from a septic tank, to the clean water system. The work supposedly happened on July 14th and 15th. Then, it said that on the morning of July 16th, at around 11 a.m., Liu fled the country with his family using a fake ID. They crossed the China-Vietnam border at a checkpoint called Yuhang and escaped to Vietnam. The report said police were now searching for him. It was a full story, names, dates, motives, locations, very detailed. But even after that report went viral, local authorities still didn't say a word. They didn't confirm it, and they didn't deny it either. A lot of people online said they didn't believe it. Some even started doing their own fact-checking. One of the main points they raised was this: sewage pipes and drinking water pipes aren't even located in the same system. They're built separately and don't cross paths like that. People online started doing their own research. Some explained that in city infrastructure, drinking water pipes and sewage pipes are built on completely separate systems. They don't run together, and connecting them isn't something that can be done easily. That was the first point. The second point was about water pressure. Tap water is pumped through the system under pressure. It flows strongly and is pressurized to push water out to homes. Sewage systems, on the other hand, rely on gravity. Wastewater flows downhill naturally, without pressure. So even if the two systems were connected by mistake, sewage wouldn't flow into the tap water. If anything, the tap water would leak into the sewage line, not the other way around. That's why many people thought the story about a deliberate sabotage just didn't make sense. It sounded more like a dramatic internet rumor than a real event. Then, on July 19th, the Yuhang district government finally released the official investigation results. They said that after the incident, a team of experts at the national and provincial levels had been urgently assembled to investigate. And now, they had the answer. According to the report, the water wasn't contaminated by sewage. Instead, under certain natural climate conditions, a type of algae and anaerobic bacteria had broken down and produced sulfur-based compounds, specifically thioethers, which caused the strange smell. It sounded very technical and scientific. The announcement also told everyone not to spread rumors or believe false claims. The theory about sewage being mixed into the water system? They said that was completely fake. Shortly after that, the local police announced they had arrested someone, a man named Shao, who they said was responsible for fabricating the viral police report from July 18th. He was accused of forging that entire story and had already been placed under criminal detention. That announcement definitely scared some people. Once someone had actually been arrested, many people stopped reposting the rumor, even if they still had doubts. One thing was clear. Although the government had been slow to explain what happened, they were very fast when it came to punishing whoever spread false information. Still, around July 19th, even with the official conclusion out, many people didn't buy it. Some residents said, "Fine, if we can't trust what we're told, let's go find out ourselves." They collected tap water samples from their own homes and took them to local testing agencies. But guess what? The labs refused to test the water. They told residents, "Sorry, we can't help you. We're not allowed to test this." That only made people more suspicious. They were just trying to figure out if there was poop in the water, but they weren't even allowed to check. And then people started asking another question. Where were the local news outlets? Throughout this entire incident, not a single major media organization in Hangzhou had reported on what happened. Not one.
杭州那么多网红，余杭区自来水事件这事儿怎么集体哑巴啦？啊，你们撕逼带货在那打 PK 的时候嗷嗷叫啊！你这种事儿 一出来没有人说呀。杭州这么多网红，你们怎么集体熄火了？没人站出来说两句。以后不要去嘲笑印度人喝那个恒河水了。
It felt like everything just went quiet, like the whole thing disappeared. And people began to ask, do you remember how fired up Chinese media were when Japan announced it was going to release nuclear wastewater? The coverage was intense, serious tone, non-stop reporting, strong emotions, endless follow-up. So now, when people are saying their own tap water smells like poop, where's that same energy? Why didn't anyone show the same level of urgency and persistence to investigate this? Of course, no one gave an answer. So next, we had to look at the official investigation report released by the city of Hangzhou. They said the smell came from something called thioether compounds. Naturally, the report was filled with technical terms, so let me help translate. After reading it, I can tell you, residents of Hangzhou weren't wrong. Their noses were spot on. What are thioether compounds? They're the chemical group responsible for the smell of feces. One of them, methyl allyl sulfide, is actually one of the key sources of that strong poop odor. So when people said it smelled like feces, they weren't exaggerating. They were absolutely right. But the report tried to distance the incident from that interpretation. It said the thioether compounds were produced through the anaerobic breakdown of algae under specific natural climate conditions. In other words, it blamed nature. It said the smell had nothing to do with human waste. That phrasing felt carefully chosen. First, let's talk about that so-called specific climate condition. If this was really caused by the weather, why did it only happen at the Dongtiaoxi water intake? Why not in other districts of Hangzhou under the same climate? Did nature just decide to target Yuhang and Liangzhu and leave the rest alone? That doesn't really make sense. Second, even if we accept the algae explanation, it still points to one thing. The water was polluted before it entered the treatment plant. Because for algae to multiply and anaerobic bacteria to break down and release sulfur compounds, there needs to be contamination in the first place. So that leads to the next question. What caused the pollution? Could it have been human waste? That's what we'll get to next. But before that, let me give you some background on the water sources in Yuhang and Liangzhu. Hangzhou's water supply comes from three main sources: Qiandao Lake, the Qiantang River, and the Dongtiaoxi River. Qiandao Lake has the best quality. Originally, most of Hangzhou's tap water came from the Qiantang River, but its quality wasn't great, so the city later built a diversion project to bring water from Qiandao Lake. Even so, the water from Qiandao Lake isn't enough for the entire city. As of now, about 37% of Hangzhou's tap water comes from Qiandao Lake. Around 20% comes from Dongtiaoxi, and the rest is from the Qiantang River. Out of the three, Dongtiaoxi has the poorest water quality. It originates in Tianmushan, belongs to the Tai River system, and runs over 100 kilometers in length. So if something went wrong with the water coming from there, it wouldn't be surprising. But blaming it entirely on natural conditions still feels like a stretch to many people. In earlier years, the Dongtiaoxi River was heavily polluted. Its water quality was consistently rated as Category 5, the worst. Even though it's considered the mother river of the region, the water has always been in bad shape. I came across a research paper published back in 2013 in the journal Rock and Mineral Analysis. The researchers had sampled fish from the river, specifically carp, to study the levels of heavy metal contamination. And what they found was shocking. The heavy metal levels were way over the national safety limits. Zinc, for example, exceeded the limit by several times. There were also high levels of other heavy metals. Basically, the fish were unsafe to eat. That gives you an idea of just how poor the water quality was. The pollution in Dongtiaoxi mainly came from two sources. The first is industrial. There are multiple industrial zones upstream, filled with chemical factories and similar enterprises. Some of you may remember that over a decade ago, Hangzhou had a serious tap water incident. People opened their taps and found the water smelled terrible. It wasn't drinkable. The source was eventually traced to Qingshan Lake. A factory in one of the upstream industrial parks had illegally discharged organic pollutants into the river. That polluted the entire Dongtiaoxi, and the contamination entered the tap water system. No one could drink it. That was the first kind of pollution. The second major source is agricultural runoff. Dongtiaoxi runs through Yuhang and Liangzhu, which serve as water sources for Hangzhou. Yuhang is now home to many major tech companies, Alibaba, Taobao, Tmall, and other big names. Economically, the district is doing well. But because of its location and lower political priority, it has limited access to the cleaner water from Qiandao Lake. At the beginning of this year, local officials in Yuhang claimed they were now drinking Qiandao Lake water, but that was mostly a PR move. In reality, they still rely heavily on Dongtiaoxi. Yuhang is serious about protecting the water source on its side. It doesn't have much local industry near the river, but directly across from Yuhang is Deqing County in Huzhou. Deqing is an agricultural area, and that creates major problems. There's livestock farming, pigs, fish, shrimp, all being raised in the Dongtiaoxi basin. Pig waste is often discharged directly into the river. Some even say that dead pigs might just be dumped in and left to float away. The fish and shrimp farming is done at high density, which means a lot of feed goes into the water, and all their waste stays in it too. All of this severely pollutes the river. So for a long time, the water in Dongtiaoxi was rated category 4 or 5, basically unfit for drinking. In the last 10 years, there have been cleanup efforts, and the quality has improved somewhat. But tensions remain between Deqing and Yuhang. Yuhang said, "We're trying to drink this water, and you're dumping pig and fish waste into it every day. This can't go on." So they sat down and negotiated a deal. Under the agreement, Deqing would shut down some pig and fish farms. If they did, and the water quality stayed above Category 3, the national minimum standard for drinking water, then Yuhang would pay them between 6 and 10 million yuan a year. But if the water quality dropped below that, then Deqing would have to pay Yuhang 5 million yuan in return.
它不只是简单给一笔钱这么一回事儿，更多的呢，它是要体现共同保护、共同发展、共同富裕。
So that was basically the agreement, a kind of ecological compensation bet. And at the time, it was considered a model across the country. In fact, it was even featured on CCTV's Focus interview program. They highlighted it as a success story. Hangzhou had money, Deqing was relatively poor, so Hangzhou was paying Deqing not to pollute the water. And the result? Supposedly, the water quality in Dongtiaoxi had improved. But now, years later, this major pollution incident has made people question everything. Clearly, the agreement didn't solve the problem. In fact, it looks like the pollution has come back even worse. Which brings us to the big question. Was there actual feces in the water this time? Let's start by examining the government's explanation. The official statement claimed the smell came from thioether compounds caused by the anaerobic breakdown of algae under specific weather conditions. But here's the thing. When that kind of breakdown happens, it usually only affects the smell. The water itself should still look clear. Remember what happened at Taihu Lake back in 2006? There was a huge algae bloom, and it caused the city of Wuxi to lose water for over 3 million people. But even then, the water was clear. It just smelled terrible. That was a common understanding, stinky but not cloudy. In this Hangzhou case, though, the water wasn't just smelly, it was murky. The turbidity was very high. It didn't just smell like poop, it looked dirty too. So if this was just an algae bloom, it doesn't quite match up. Something feels off. Now, some people argued, well, maybe the water was muddy because they quickly switched sources. Maybe it came from the front end of a reservoir where the water wasn't settled yet. But honestly, that doesn't hold up either. No matter where the water came from, whether it was Dongtiaoxi or some emergency backup reservoir, it still had to go through sedimentation, filtration, and treatment before entering the public supply. You can't just pump dirty, untreated water into the tap system. That's not how it works. So that's one issue. But here's another. Some sharp-eyed residents in Hangzhou had already noticed problems with Dongtiaoxi water as early as May or June. One thing Hangzhou has done fairly well is making environmental data public. On the Yuhang district government website, they post regular water quality monitoring reports from the intake points. Those reports go back month by month, March, April, May, June, July. In March and April, things looked fine, but in May, problems started showing up. By April, 2 intake sites were already showing positive readings for fecal coliform bacteria. Then in June, things got worse. On June 5th, the Yongsheng intake on Dongtiaoxi showed a fecal coliform count of around 7,300. Another site on the river, Fengku, showed about 780. In comparison, Qiandao Lake had no detectable levels at all. But the Sailing Reservoir, another source, showed a reading of 6,500. Those numbers are high. Water at that level doesn't even meet Class 3 standards. It's barely within Class 2. For reference, Class 3 is the minimum acceptable for drinking water in China. So this wasn't a sudden event. The data shows that Dongtiaoxi had already been showing signs of contamination well before the July crisis. Then came a major spike on July 2nd. The water quality report showed that at the Yongsheng intake point on Dongtiaoxi, the fecal coliform count had surged to 16,000. At the Fengku intake, it was 4,400. Even Qiandao Lake, normally very clean, registered 1,800, which was surprisingly high. But the most shocking numbers came from the Sailing Reservoir and Mantushan Reservoir. Sailing recorded a fecal coliform level of 28,000, and Mantushan was at 24,000. Interestingly, by July 4th, all of the readings had returned to normal. Now, what exactly is the fecal coliform index? It refers to bacteria originally found in feces, hence the name. It's one of the most important indicators of water contamination. So when you see numbers like these, it clearly shows the water was seriously polluted at the beginning of July. How bad was it? National standards in China say that for water to qualify as Category 3, the lowest acceptable grade for drinking, the fecal coliform count must be under 10,000. Category 4 allows up to 20,000, and Category 5 allows up to 40,000. So Sealing's 28,000 and Dongtiaoxi's 16,000. That's well past the safe limit. 16,000 already makes it Category 4, meaning not suitable for drinking. 28,000 is nearly Category 5. And yet, this was the water being supplied to residents. So multiple water sources in the Yuhang district area had already been heavily contaminated. And now let's go back to what the government's report claimed. They said the smell came from thioether compounds produced by anaerobic bacteria breaking down algae, triggered by specific natural climate conditions. But here's the thing. That only describes what happened on the surface. It doesn't explain what caused the algae bloom in the first place. Because for algae to grow rapidly, the water has to be rich in nutrients, specifically nitrogen and ammonia. And what raises nitrogen and ammonia levels in water? Simple. Poop. A high concentration of human or animal waste provides exactly the nutrients algae need to explode in number. Now, to be fair, fecal coliform bacteria aren't produced only by algae growth. The bacteria and the algae bloom tend to show up together when the water has been heavily polluted. Yes, you could argue that other things, like fertilizer runoff, could also cause algae to bloom. But looking at all the evidence, it seems very likely that the main source of this pollution was agricultural waste coming from Dixing County, directly across the river. We're talking about pig farms, fish farms, shrimp farms, all dumping waste into the Dongtiaoxi. The river becomes nutrient-rich, algae thrive, bacteria multiply, and in the process, they release sulfur-based compounds that smell exactly like human waste. That's how those thioethers ended up in the water supply. And that's the water people in Hangzhou ended up drinking. If this theory turns out to be true, then it means the residents of Hangzhou, especially those in Yuhang, did in fact drink feces. That conclusion wouldn't even be far off. Of course, it might not have been human feces. Maybe it was pig feces, maybe fish feces, but either way, it came from feces. And that, I believe, is highly likely. Next, I want to talk about how the Hangzhou city government handled this whole situation. And in my view, they handled it very poorly. Let's start with the basics. Tap water is a public utility. Public utilities are among the most fundamental services that keep a city running. On the morning of July 16th, around 9 a.m., when residents first noticed the problem, the government said they activated an emergency response. But here's the question. Why didn't they tell people to stop drinking the water? Why didn't they announce a temporary water shutdown and set up emergency water supply points around the city? That's what a responsible response would have looked like. We treat power outages, water shutdowns, and public transit failures as major issues in urban management. And this was water that might have had feces in it. Yet the authorities didn't notify the public, didn't stop the supply, and didn't offer an alternative. That is a serious failure. Even worse, the issue wasn't discovered by the water company itself. It was ordinary citizens who noticed the awful smell while using the water, who realized something was wrong. Only then did the company activate its emergency response. What does that say? It means there was no quality control before the water left the treatment plant and entered the city's supply system. None. And quality control isn't just about chemical levels. It also includes odor. In fact, water smell is officially graded on a 5-level scale. Proper water testing includes someone actually smelling the water at the plant. So for water to smell that bad, like feces, and nobody to notice, that means no one was testing anything. The water was released straight into the city's pipes with no inspection at all. And let's say, for argument's sake, that the smell came from thioether compounds or even fecal matter. There are treatment methods for that. You can use ozone for sterilization, activated carbon for absorption, and extrafiltration. It wouldn't be perfect, but the smell could be significantly reduced. But because the water company didn't test the water, they never even realized there was a problem. So they sent water that smelled like actual feces directly into thousands of homes in Yuhang and Liangzhu. That is a massive failure of duty. And what did the company do in response? They offered a symbolic apology and 5 tons of free water as compensation. Honestly, what a joke. Some residents said their home water filters broke down in less than half an hour. And those filters aren't cheap. Some cost thousands of yuan. A 5-ton water credit isn't going to cover that. Not even close.
我们家到现在已经用了4大桶水了，而且前置过滤器以及净水滤芯全部报废。官方给的解决方案是减免5吨水费。我们附近几个小区的朋友在各平台的留言以及发布的视频都被下架以及限制发布了，我真的是气笑了。
But according to the latest updates, some residents have said that property management companies have started collecting information. If your household water filter was damaged, you can report it, and apparently the government will replace it for free. But that only covers material losses. What about the people who had health issues? Some went to hospitals for checkups. Who's paying for that? Others got sick, had diarrhea. What about their medical expenses? The Hangzhou Water Company hasn't offered any explanation or any solution for these cases. Nothing. Honestly, I think their attitude is incredibly arrogant. That's the second major problem. And the third problem is this. After all of this, I came across a post from a blogger, someone who works in cultural design. He had gone to Shanghai for an exhibition on July 18th and 19th. He returned to Hangzhou on the 19th or 20th. By that time, the authorities had already claimed the water situation was under control. Everything was back to normal. But when he got home and turned on his tap, the water still smelled awful. He let it run all night, and the next morning it still smelled. He wrote that he felt deeply sad. He said he realized that something as fundamental as a city's water supply, something that should be stable and reliable, was actually being held together by chance. That it all depended on the goodwill of a few people. That's it. He said, this is the era we live in. And he made another powerful point. Throughout the entire incident, Hangzhou residents stayed silent. There were no protests, no public outrage. But it wasn't because the problem wasn't serious. It was because we've been trained to treat extreme situations as normal. He said we've been forced to accept lives where major decisions are made without us, where our habits can be disrupted at any time, where the rhythm of our daily lives can be broken without warning, and we have no way to resist. But he added, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to make helplessness a way of life. That post was shared nearly 10,000 times online. And honestly, the saddest part of it all, the life he said he didn't want to live, he probably has no choice but to live it. And there's nothing he can do about it. That, I think, is the most heartbreaking part. That's all I wanted to share today. Thank you.
但我家就在污染区，真实的情况就是水是黄的、臭的，一股臭海鲜味。已经有好几个业主因为肠胃炎发烧去医院了，养的鱼也死了。2天了，我们要么开车去别的区吃，要么矿泉水煮粥、煮泡面，外卖不敢吃，澡也不敢洗，刷牙都只能用矿泉水。水管里面的污染物多久能消除，我们也不知道。到底有没有人在解决这个问题啊？城市用水这么大的事情，为什么处理的这么慢，这么潦草？
河对岸是德清县，他们并不在东条溪取水。正因如此，多年来同一段河的不同功能定位 也曾让两地对河流的保护力度有所差异。
我们养殖呢主要是靠水，后来养虾的人多了，大家都养虾，还有养鱼的。
德清县下主湖街道的青虾养殖专业户胡景焕，养了20多年虾。说起从前，胡景焕对养虾造成的水污染记忆犹新。
养虾的尾水直接排到河里，后来呢污染越来越严重了。
2018年9月，余杭区和德清县两地正式签订了东条溪流域生态补偿协议。
流域生态补偿呢，它不只是简单给一笔钱这么一回事儿，更多的呢，它是要体现共同保护、共同发展、共同富裕。
在杭州洗菜做饭用的是什么水？用的是矿泉水。哪个城市能做到？
最后这个一凸开啊，就溅了我满脸喷粪的，满脸是粪，哎，但是呢，那个气就呼呼的往外冒，哎，我们马上就是那个接起管子了以后啊，我们那个沼气灶上啊，就冒出1尺高的火焰来，因为那个也是憋的呀，我看那个再憋一阵的那个池子要炸了。